Hello, welcome to the Bee Vlog. I'm Bill. Today I'm going to be building a hive body using just standard 1x8 lumber that I picked up at Home Depot. This lumber actually measures in at 3/4 of an inch by 7¼ inches. And it's perfect for making medium-sized boxes, which is all I use. Today I'll be making actually a 5-frame box. I plan on doing some Nucs next year, as well as setting some swarm bait hives or some traps. And my swarm trap design will be using 2 of these 5-frame Nucs stacked one above the other to give me the volume I want. And that will be in another later video. This hive body design actually comes from Stephen Tillman on the MichiganBees.org website. They have a section called In the Beekeeper's Workshop. I'll provide a link to the design and that website in the video description below. He has some great plans that you can download for free that is exactly how I'm going to be building my hive bodies. Plus he has other plans for other components of the hive, the screen bottom board, the covers, everything. So it's a really good resource if you want to be able to build your own hive equipment. This is a very simple design and construction. It's one of the reasons I really like it. Here's a box here that I can take apart. Instead of using the box joints that you see on most hive bodies, it uses just dados in the corners here with a spline that holds it together. Then the whole thing gets either nailed or stapled together. I also use some glue to help strengthen it to make sure that that joint doesn't come apart. I do the handles a little bit differently than shown on the In the Beekeeper's Workshop website. They do that nice cove handle that you see on most hive bodies. I don't have any equipment set up to be able to do that, so I just use a stacked dado head to cut a 3/4 inch slot, and it seems to work okay. I haven't had any problems yet, and it's a good handle hold. So I'll show you how I go through the process of cutting it and putting it together. The front and back faces of the box are receiving a rabbet at the top. This is going to be the frame rest. The dimensions of the rabbet are 5/8 wide by 3/8 of an inch deep. Before making this cut, I made sure to pick what would be the outside and the inner surface of the box, making sure that any knots in the board are going to be clear of that cut. I'm using a stacked dado head cutter with a sacrificial fence to make that cut. While I've got the stacked dado head cutter set up on my table saw, I'm going to go ahead and cut these handles here. This is just using the dado head cutter set up to cut 3/4 inch dados. And I laid out a little layout here. You can see I marked the center line of the saw blade. And from there I measure 4 inches one direction to cut the front faces here. This board is about 8 inches wide. Exact precise measurements here, it doesn't really matter too much. We're just cutting handles. So I measure 4 inches, which would be half the distance of the board, to set up a hard stop here, similar to what I've got here. So I'll just demonstrate that. So about 4 inches there, and I clamp in a hard stop. And then when I cut this slot for the handle, I put the I put the outward face down on the table, turn on the saw, and lay the board down slowly, making sure it's tight up against the fence here and against the hard stop. Put the hard stop on the outward side of the blade so that the blade is pushing the board into the stop. And I slowly lower it down until the board is all the way down on the table, and then lift it straight up again, and then that cuts the handle. I've got it set up to cut about 1/2 inch deep, so we don't go all the way through, but I've got a good size handle here. For the longer sideboards, I measure out from the center 11.5 inches. This board is about 20 inches long, and again, exact measurements when cutting the handles don't really matter that much. So I measure out 11.5 inches, which would give me a total 3-inch travel as I lay the board down. I have another hard stop measured out 11.5 inches down on that end too. You just can't see it in the camera. So I measure out 11.5 inches. Set my stop. Do the same thing on the other end. Then for this longer board, it's the same thing. Turn on the saw, lay the board down onto the blade slowly, and then slide the board until I hit the other stop. That gives me a 3-inch travel here. That gives me the longer slot. I have the fence set back 2 inches, so the top of the handle is 2 inches from the top of the board. I just do that on all of the faces. It's a pretty quick little setup, pretty quick little easy to cut handle. First I'll cut the front and back boards. The rabbet that I cut in the last step facing up, because this is the inside face. I want to cut the handles on the outside face. I'll be cutting the handle on the longer sideboards, and I set up my stops to be 11.5 inches from the center. You can see my other end stop here now. And I went through the boards and I picked the outside faces and put them downward, because all of the handles will be cut on the down facing side of the board. Now I'll be cutting the dados for this corner joint. This is a very easy joint to create and set up on the table saw. Just using 2 dado cuts, one on each side of the corner. Cut using my stacked dado head cutter set to cut 1/4 inch wide and 3/8 inch deep. And then using a spline that I cut earlier, just using some 3/4 inch lumber and cutting it 1/4 inch thick. You'll want to cut these dados with just one setup on the table saw. Once I set the fence, I don't want to move it, because the way I cut these is I put the outer face of the box against the fence, run it along and cut one dado, and then turn it 180 degrees over, keeping the outside of the box against the fence, and cut the other dado. Then to run the dado on this face, I put the inside face of the box down on the table saw and cut the dado, and then turn the board over, again keeping the inside of the box down on the table saw, and cut the other dado. And this allows for this joint to be perfectly aligned, so that when I put in the spline, and put the pieces together, the outsides of the corner line up perfectly. Very easy to set up. So I'll start by cutting the dado on the corners for the front and back faces first. These are the pieces that have the rabbet for the frame rest. I'm using a feather board to keep the wood tight against the fence. Now, the only change to the setup was changing the position of my feather board and adding on my crosscut sled, ready to cut on the sideboards. Now these, again, handle goes up so the outside is up. No change to the fence position and no change to the height of the blade. The glue I like to use is outdoor glue, or Tight Bond 2 is one of the outdoor glues available in my area. I like to use a glue brush to spread the glue in the joints. Make sure I've got good coverage. Put it upside down, so I make sure the top edge here is even. I'm using 1.5 inch staples. I'm just going to pin, check for square. I'm just going to put a couple staples in for now. I like to do all the final stapling at the end. Make sure you keep track of which side is up. So the handle goes at the top and on the outside, handle on the outside. Since I'm going to be cutting off about 5/8 of an inch off the bottom here, I want to keep the staples well away from that bottom edge so I don't cut through staples on my table saw and ruin my blade. After the glue is all dried, I set the fence on my table saw to 6 5/8 so I can cut the bottom off the box. And the box is finished. Last step on the box, which I'm not going to bother showing in the video, is painting. And I usually paint with a primer coat and then 2 coats of color. I use outdoor latex paint.